Now, if that didn't result in violence, had there been massive riots and thieves and looting, that might have resulted in violence.
So, but if that was a malicious act, it wouldn't have been considered cyber terrorism just because the result wasn't the desired effect.
It depends. For instance, hospital patients that are on respirators, there's a physical effect when their backup power generators run out of fuel.
Yeah, but in this case, that would have been a coincidental that would have been a coincidental side effect. The target of that, if that was an event, the target of that would have been, haha, blackout the East Coast.
Now, I'm not.
It wasn't just, blackout hospitals.
I agree in principle. However, I'm no lawyer, but if you're the driver of the car of the guy who shot somebody, you committed murder. And that's kind of how the legal process works. To my understanding, they're going to go after you for murder, even though you're not the one that shot the person.
So I think taken for granted that it was a premeditated act and somebody died, that would probably be negligent. They'd still be guilty of something, not exactly murder, maybe negligent, whatever else they come up with.
There is a case in law books. I mean, there is a case of felony murder where, if somebody dies as a result of a felony that you have committed, then you are guilty of, they basically consider you to have murdered that person, whether or not during the commission of your felony you intended to hurt them at all.
Right. So your actions indirectly caused violence, therefore you committed the violence. It's an associative property.
If you're creating definitions, though, violence is an awfully loose word.
Because there is violence against property. I think vandalism is considered violence against property.
Okay. Now, let me point one thing out, okay, just to kind of level it out. Terrorism. Forget the cyber. Terrorism is about creating fear. All right? Cyber terrorism is the use of cyberspace and all the other infrastructure to create or facilitate fear, ultimately. How you might apply it in a legal environment, you need some kind of a threshold when it comes to violence. And that would get, again, I have a general definition. It's not, set in stone. And every time you say, every time you print something, everyone has an opinion. So, and I'm not being offensive, okay? So I throw this out as a working definition. Yes, sir.
Why bother redefining terrorism? I mean, the second half of that is redefining terrorism. Why not use a accepted definition of terrorism and just tag on the cyber part?
Well, if you take a look at some of the laws that are being passed around the world as for what the law calls terrorism, I think we could spend 2 hours going through those. Every government has their own perspective and agenda in passing their legislation. I'm giving you this definition so you know where I'm coming from for the rest of the talk. Maybe that's the way I should present that. I'm not redefining terrorism. I'm defining cyber terrorism, which is different. And if there isn't a distinction, then I throw a hand grenade into a church, I'm committing the same act as if I hack into somebody's network and send them a message that scares them. Yes, sir.
You're saying violence that creates fear, basically, here is the definition of terrorism. For example, if we do turn the power off, we're creating fear, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
But we haven't created violence.
We haven't created violence. The violence and fear seems kind of different here. Something that results in fear amongst something different that results in violence. Like if, as a computer specialist, I could say, hey, look, there's this vulnerability to Microsoft's application here. And I could create tons of fear or throughout the entire world just by publicizing that. Would that be a terrorist act according to this, though?
No, because there's no violence involved.
Well, if we don't write the statutes right, it might be.
Yeah.
And this is what I'm trying to point out. If you don't, now, don't even use my definition. Maybe we need to even cut out the notion of cyber terrorism, just say use of computers to facilitate terror. The problem is, the larger the net you make, the bigger the catch. So when we go fishing, we catch dolphins with our tuna. Big net. Well, acceptable losses? That's for the population to decide. Now, cyberspace usage by terrorists. Network structures, which is more than just computers, allows terrorists to operate in distributed cells over greater geographic coverage areas, and they can maintain an identity without a physical location. Now let's put this into this country's terrorist background, say the Ku Klux Klan right after the Civil War. I'm not going to speak for what they do or don't do now, but back then, imagine if they didn't have a meeting place, if they could have groups of 5 people scattered all over the country, could coordinate their activities, and only one small cell would get caught periodically, what the state of fear would have been back then. Well, this is what the network environment allows, is small groups over geographic area globally, and they're able to be mobile and still maintain a web presence. And I'm going to give some examples. These are the 3 main things that I feel cyber terrorism's contribution to terrorism is. Communication, coordination, and information sharing. Using voice over IP, email and news groups, file transfers, chat sessions, websites, and any other emerging technology that's coming out. There are games out there where you get to be in some Desert Storm kind of a thing, and if you want to be the Iraqis, you can, and you can have conversations. Yeah, I think we need to blow up this, and we need to kill that, and we need to shoot. What if it's not a gamer? Now that sounds bizarre. Why should we be doubting what's being done? How do you monitor that stuff? You really can't, because it's actually in a proper context. Here's a little diagram for you. At the bottom, or I'd say, let me put it in the middle. Let's imagine each of these is a cell. And they're communicating via laptops and desktops and programmable phones and pagers and PDAs and so forth, using whatever local technology. So each cell talks to itself. The cells themselves may access a universal communications and information portal. Maybe it's a website, a news group, a whole host of stuff. And so somebody posts, we don't like the new prime minister of so-and-so. And that signals these guys to think about how they could go after him. Out in the open. Or, this country invaded that country, so we need a new jihad, and all of you think about how you can help Muslims around the world, or narco-terrorists down in Chile and Colombia, and etc. Okay? It's not restricted just to these guys living in the desert. So this is kind of up out in the open. This is what we see. Then each of the individual cells in various clusters may have a higher level of coordination. The lieutenants of Al-Qaeda, perhaps. These guys operate at the command and control level. Maybe Osama, an aide. Okay? Now, according to the Anti-Terrorism Coalition's database of terrorist websites and e-groups, there's a website out there, and that's what they do. They keep track of all these guys. There's over 1,000 websites, e-groups, and forums that promote and disseminate terrorist activities. Training manuals, all kinds of stuff. No small matter. I must compliment these people because since they started posting this stuff, about 3/4 of these sites have been taken down due to violation in your user agreement. And other countries have taken down the sites once they're aware of them. As hackers, keep that in mind as you're perusing things. Here's another little thing. Anybody want to debate if cyber terrorism exists or not, just look at all the beheadings. I have never witnessed a beheading live, and I have been all over the place. I've seen a lot of things. I've never seen one human being take a head off of another. Now I can. Do you really want to travel, spend your tourism dollars, or start a business in a country where this occurs? If that isn't affecting political and economic change, I don't know what other, regardless of the definitions, this has an impact. And by the way, I'm not advising, but I will suggest that you go take a look at part or all of one of these beheadings. Because these are the type of people you're dealing with. I'm not pro or anti-war or any of this sort of thing. I'm telling you, though, you better understand the enemy. Because these guys don't care.
The posting of the video itself, you might argue, isn't a criminal act, although it depicts a criminal act, right?
Well, now, that's a very valid point. If I'm a news journalist or even an individual, and I obtain a video, somebody sends it to me anonymously, and I post it, all right? Now, maybe I would be immoral for it. Maybe I would be lecherous because I'm going to somehow profit from it. Or I could be viewed as sympathetic. It depends on what the intent is. But setting that aside, posting it doesn't make me a criminal. How I acquired it might. Conspiracy, being associated, being a supporter. Now, there's been no successful prosecutions in this arena because websites can be created with no face-to-face identity. So this is a big thing. But these guys are getting the message out. Don't mess with us. Don't come to Iraq and rebuild a country. Don't come to this part of the world because you'll show up on TV and the whole world will know. We got the better of you. So, not a fun place. Now imagine if you're law enforcement. Now I have to say, law enforcement does an exemplary job for a large part of what they do. They have finite number of people, finite number of resources over large geographic areas with a whole range of technical issues that they encounter. Okay? So I'm not anti-law enforcement, but they're not prepared to deal with this. You remember this guy? Let me step aside while you shoot dart guns and other things at him. Anybody think that these guys are all camel jockeys really needs to reassess their capabilities. The majority of Al-Qaeda leadership came from middle class, from large cities.